folks, and welcome to Typology, the show in which we explore the mystery of the human personality through the lens of the Enneagram. I'm Anthony Skinner, producer of the show, and we are happy to have you here. We've got a lot of great things going on. Before I tell you about our guest coming up, I want to give you a little primer. Ian has partnered with Donald Miller from StoryBrand to offer you something really, really fantastic. We're going to be telling you more about it later, but all I'm going to say now is go to EnneagramMadeSimple.com. That's ENNEAGRAM, MadeSimple.com, and check it out. More on that later. Hey, you're going to love today's guest. He is the author of 17 books, including the ECPA award-winning book, Whisper, the USA Today bestseller, Chase the Lion, and the New York Times bestseller, The Circle Maker. He is the founder and lead pastor of National Community Church, one church with 7 campuses throughout Washington, D.C., known as one of the most innovative and influential churches in America, and also owns and operates Ebenezer's Coffee House, the Miracle Theater, and the D.C. Dream Center. We're talking about Mark Batterson. We have a great time with Mark today, so you're really going to enjoy this interview. Hey, that's it for me, Anthony Skinner. We're going to get on to the interview. And now, here's our host, Ian Cron.
Mark Batterson, welcome to Typology.
Hey, thanks, Ian. So fun to be with you.
Can you believe it? We're face to face, man.
It's unreal.
Gosh, I feel like you're my long lost brother that I've only spoken to through like from a long distance away, man.
Well, this has been a long time coming.
Yes, indeed. Now, tell me about your Enneagram journey.
Yeah. My wife and I were on a plane, which I believe is the best place to read a book at 30,000 feet.
Yeah.
It's crazy. You think different thoughts. Wow. And so literally we're on a cross-country flight, and Laura, my wife, is reading The Road Back to You, and she leans over and says, if you want to crawl into my head and understand me, read this.
Wow. Whoa.
And I read it, and a lot of things clicked into place. And so we both devoured that particular book, and then have really been on a journey ever since, and felt like the Enneagram has been a huge piece of our puzzle as marriage, and even professionally. So much self-understanding has come from it. So, hey, at this juncture, I might as well say thanks.
Oh. Well, Mutual Admiration Society in the moment, and I'm grateful that y'all have read it, and I didn't know that, and so I'm really gratified because I've long had an admiration for you and for your work. So that's fantastic. I want to know maybe just a little bit more in a granular sense, like, okay, so it's been a part of your journey. How? Like in your marriage and in your ministry, like what effect has the Enneagram had on you in your marriage and at church?
Yeah, I might even talk on the spectrum from mundane all the way to momentous, Ian. On a mundane level, there's that little part about my wife is a type 1 perfectionist, and I didn't really understand. I don't care how the dishes go in the dishwasher as long as they get clean.
Yep.
And I didn't fully understand why they might need to be redesigned or
redesigned.
That's great.
But I think, it helped me understand, even in mundane things. And then Laura knows that I'm a type 3 performer. And so, Ian, the challenge for me, this is getting kind of pretty vulnerable right out of the gate. I don't have an off switch, I mean, it's really hard for me to turn off the performer piece, both as a pastor who's kind of in a public eye, but, even as an author that is often interacting with readers, I really struggle to find that off switch. And so, and then even on a grand scale, I think how we relate to each other, but maybe even just as significantly, how we relate to God. My tendency is to try to perform, and there's a real downside to that, especially as it relates to things like grace. Yeah.
That's a huge insight, isn't it? Because, grace is difficult for any of us to swallow, right? I mean, it's really, it's a bewildering, not very intuitive idea, but I would imagine for 3s and 1s and other types, like grace is so hard to really allow in, right?
It is. And, by definition, grace cannot be deserved. And for a performer, that is really hard to swallow. So, and then, we have to be really careful that if I worship based on how I feel like I'm doing, how I'm performing, then isn't that really in a sense, self-worship? And so there are very kind of layers of motivation and things that I think can be really difficult to navigate. Because at the end of the day, it's about doing what we do in view of God's mercies and in light of God's grace. And so, I think those are tough lessons that I've had to learn as someone who is wired to perform.
So I was reading Richard Rohr earlier today, and one of the things, because I was just getting ready for our interview, and I'm always trying to learn more and more and more about different types, and there's so much to know, you can't remember it even after you've read it half the time. And you know what he says in one of his very sort of older books is like the Bible verse for 3s, right? From his perspective is John 15:5, right? I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And so that apart from me idea for 3s is pretty powerful, right? Like, because I think 3s, when they're on autopilot, think, I can do all of this apart from anybody, including God.
Yes. And we have a very difficult time saying no.
Yeah.
So then what happens is we try to do everything and kind of be all things to all people. And we get stretched so thin that if you try to be all things to all people, eventually you're going to be nothing to nobody because there's just not enough to go around. And so there is certainly that underside. I mean, of course, the positive, Ian, is, wow, we do know how to get things done, though, don't we?
And that's an asset. It's a gift. But as you know, the moment you begin to over rely on a gift, it inevitably becomes a liability.
Yeah.
It becomes a distortion of itself. The blessing, and we're going to get to that in a moment because that's what your book is about. But the blessing becomes a blight.
Yes.
When we rely on it too heavily. All right. So you've written a lot about challenges and brokenness. I know that you've encountered in your life. So tell me, would you be willing to tell me, and thinking perhaps through the lens of the Enneagram, if possible, like what's some of that brokenness and what's that about?
Yeah. Well, I think my first attempt at church planting, and we've had the joy of pastoring a church in Washington, D.C. for 23 years now. God's blessed it. One church, 7 campuses, and in some ways has done things that probably are beyond what we would have asked or imagined. But Ian, our first attempt at it was a fail. We fell flat on our faces, and it was terrible at the time. It's a little bit worse for a type 3 to fail at something, and it was challenging, it was embarrassing, but I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I think the cure for the fear of failure is not success. It's failure in small enough doses that you build up an immunity to it.
Ooh, that's good.
That's good.
Hey friends, we'll be back to our interview in just a moment, but I wanted to take a break to thank our Typology sponsors. First, I'd like to send out kudos to HelloFresh for making healthy eating so simple. As America's #1 meal kit, HelloFresh delivers easy, seasonal recipes and pre-measured ingredients right to your door. This is great because, I travel so often that meal planning and getting to the grocery store is not always so easy. With HelloFresh, Annie and I have said goodbye to endless trips to the grocery store and takeout food. My brother Anthony.
Yes.
You use HelloFresh, right?
We do. Actually, just the other night, May, my daughter, and I made the Korean beef bibimbap, and it was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, loved it. It's all really simple to make. All the veggies are right there in the paper bag. You just roll them out, throw the meat in, you're done in 30 minutes and ready to go.
Well, Annie and I get the meat and veggie menu, and it is delicious. My current favorite recipe is the honey glazed pork tenderloin with roasted potatoes and broccoli.
My mouth is watering now.
You know what else?
What?
There's something for everyone.
There is.
From family recipes to calorie smart and vegetarian, and fun menu series like Hall of Fame and craft burgers.
Yum.
And I love how flexible HelloFresh is.
Yes.
It is so easy to change your delivery days, food preferences, and you can even skip a week, which was awesome when I was on vacation in Colorado recently. So I just went online and I changed my delivery date and had fresh meats delivered when I got back. And HelloFresh, check this out, is giving our Typology listeners a special offer. For $80 off your first month of HelloFresh, go to hellofresh.com/typology80 and enter Typology80. This is a great deal, folks. It's like receiving 8 meals for free.
That is a great deal.
Unbelievable. Again, that's $80 off your first month of HelloFresh. Go to hellofresh.com/typology80 and enter Typology80 to get your $80 off. You won't regret it.
God gave me the gift of learning very early on what I'm capable of, and it's not much. I often say that without the help of the Holy Spirit, I'm below average. And I genuinely mean that. I mean, I'm not naturally gifted as a writer. And there are certain things that I think I've had to probably work a little bit harder than the average person. But it's those weaknesses, it's the failures, it's even some of the brokenness that then I think has set the stage and really perhaps allowed God to do some things that maybe I would have let it go to my head or kind of infect my ego more than it should have.
Wow, that's really helpful. So let me just have here's a thought I've had for a long time about threes, something I've noticed about threes. The personality structure of threes is really very often rooted in the emotion of sadness or grief. And I've had this happen multiple times when I'm a 4, I'm pretty attuned to the emotional space where when I've been with threes, they have, men in particular, in their eyes, they have this lost boy look. It's a certain sadness that you can see in their eyes, even when they're smiling, even when they're having. But sometimes threes have looked at me, and what I see is a really profound sadness, and I don't think I'm projecting that, into it. It's like there's this kind of lost boy look, and you've talked about some of the encounters and challenges, and I'm just wondering if that's a feature, if grief and sadness have played a real role in your life.
It certainly has been a piece of my puzzle. And I might say that I think I have retained a pretty healthy measure of my inner child. In fact, we have 3 children, but Sometimes I think my wife has 4, Ian.
Right. Yeah, right.
With one. But, I think a real defining moment for me was we lost my father-in-law. He passed at the age of 55, and it just was one of those shocking, not expected, tremendous grief. And he was a model and a mentor in ministry for me. And I was 2 years into pastoring, and I was floundering after that. But I think we walk through that in a way that, honestly, it's actually a little piece of what I talk about in Double Blessing, that I ask God for a double portion of his anointing, which is kind of a throwback for those who might not know the Old Testament scriptures of Elisha asking for a double portion of Elijah's anointing, so to speak. And, I kind of asked for that same thing. And so, we still grieve. I still have tears 20 years later. But I think that grief, in a sense, it plows the soil. It turns the soil of our hearts over. And I think it's helped me empathize and perhaps even pastor people through those difficulties and challenges that they face. It's very difficult to help someone where you have not been hurt. And so I'm sure I have my fair share of grief and sadness. And then, part of what I do is walk people through those kinds of seasons. And so, I think that's a reality, certainly for me, and in particular as a 3.
You want to do some therapy?
Well, hey, if we're keeping it real,
let's keep it real for a second.
I've had some checkups this year. Let's just put it that way. And I do, Ian. I don't trust leaders who don't walk with a limp.
Right.
In other words, I think there's a wear and tear in their bumps and bruises, and if you don't reveal those things, I think you're faking it. And honestly, people don't identify. And as a 3, sometimes I want to share the success stories, not the failure stories. People don't identify with that. And so what I've had to learn to do is really be real about some of those challenges and struggles. And, very interesting. I actually said to our congregation that I'm getting some counseling right now because it's been a wear and tear season. We've been in a building project and probably taken on more than I should have. What's funny? Of all the things that I've preached over the last year, I've had more people come up to me about that one little comment and say thank you, because it gives me permission to seek out some help. And for the record, I don't know anybody who doesn't need some counseling for something.
Yeah. Thank you. It's people like you that keep me at work. Just by way of just helping people with an insight about this, and it's that typically in this feeling triad, the heart triad, 2, 3, and 4, 2s tend to be in conflict with grief and sadness. So I think all 3 numbers have issues around grief, sadness, and shame, right?
Yeah.
And so 2s tend to be in conflict with sadness and grief. 4s tend to overdo and become over-attached to grief, whereas 3s underdo grief, and they'll part of the strategy there is to numb out feelings so they don't get in the way of working to reach their goals. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I meant when I said sometimes I see this, maybe what I should have said is I see this unattended sorrow in the eyes of 3s.
Well, when you put it that way, it hits a little bit closer to home. Because and part of it may be that I have a positivity strength.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm like the little kid, right? The famous little kid who, for his birthday, walked in and got a pile of manure and said, with this much manure, there must be a pony somewhere. I'm that kid.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, our staff has even joked that, I've had tough conversation with staff or even staff that we've had to let go, and they walk out feeling better about themselves than when they walked in, because it's harder for me to identify with some of the sadness, with some of the grief, and really own it and wrestle with it. And then what I think threes tend to do is keep ourselves busy enough that we really don't have time to do some of that deep soul work.
Well, I mean, it's not an indictment of you. It's just part of the journey that I think for twos, threes, and fours, which is, how do I relate rightly to the sadness and grief that tends to run like it's almost in the water table underneath the surface of our lives. And I think for threes, what they have to be careful of is not spinning the source of grief or failure into something that makes them look like a success.
Yes. Yep. We're pretty good at spinning it, aren't we, Ian?
Yeah.
And this comes from a guy that lives on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and so add that to the mix. And, would it be fair to say, Ian, that maybe for a three and kind of who you're describing, I think the challenge is becoming more well-rounded emotionally. We tend to be pretty good on the positive emotion side of the equation, but not as adept. And we don't spend as much time on what could be considered more of the negative or more difficult emotion side. And so no doubt that that's something that is a growth area and has been for me for a long time.
Hey, Typology Tribe, I want to thank our new sponsor, Hemp Fusion. As a writer, I tend to overuse my hands writing and typing, so I have added CBD to my daily routine to help reduce inflammation. But, as you probably know, there's a lot of confusion around CBD these days. Unlike other brands who offer just CBD, Hemp Fusion combines CBD and omegas with natural ingredients to help the body absorb CBD better. Hemp Fusion is available online and at natural products retailers near you. And just for Typology listeners, you can get 20% off your first order and free shipping. That's right, you can get 20% off your first order and free shipping. Just visit hempfusion.com, that's HEMPFUSION.com, and enter the promo code Typology, TYPOLOGY. Again, that's hempfusion.com in the promo code Typology.
So here's maybe a growth path thing for threes. One would simply be practice saying how you feel out loud. And even if you're like, I don't know what I'm feeling, just say, I don't know what I'm feeling, but I think it's maybe this, because threes just tend to have trouble identifying or naming or recognizing feelings. This is another thing that I've told threes any number of times, and it came from my friend Mike Hyatt, who is a quintessential three. He actually has a feeling wheel on his desktop. And it's like, here are the principal feelings, and then there's like 60 or 70 other names of feelings around it so that he can go, okay, all right, what I'm feeling is a shade of that. I think it's, and it may be, I'm feeling wistful. And he's like, I don't think I've ever been able to call that wistful in my whole life, But now he's got a name.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that. I think you would appreciate this, Ian. A few years ago, I was speaking to some pastors in England, and ironically spoke right after the Archbishop of Canterbury. That's a first.
Yeah, my boss.
That's a tough act to follow. But he said something I'll never forget. He said, emotional intelligence is a wonderful adjunct faculty to the gifts of the Spirit. And I think there are a lot of church contexts, spiritual contexts, where certain gifts might be functioning, but they aren't really accompanied by the emotional intelligence. And sort of where I'm going with this is just sort of reflecting on what you're saying. I have a really acute EQ. I'm good at reading other people.
Yes.
But I wonder if 3s are not as good at reading themselves and even kind of enunciating or identifying some of what we're feeling. We're a little bit better at reading the crowd.
Yes, absolutely.
But in a sense, there's a little bit of that entertainer in us that knows how to kind of play to the crowd, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. I think, though, that 3s sometimes have long been so good at reading the crowd and what the crowd wants and the feelings of the crowd that they're out of touch with what their desires and feelings are. It's like,
yes.
So part of what has to happen for 3s is so this is, like, if I were saying this, I'd be saying it to a functioning, low functioning 3. I would say part of the journey for that person is to move from being as concerned with seeming to being. So you want to move from seeming to being. Or another way might be to say, to move from sort of surface to substance.
Yeah. Yep.
Surface to substance. And what a great journey. And by the way, I know so many 3s who've made that journey and have done so, I think, very successfully. And they've become, what they tend to do is look like very healthy 6s. And it's so beautiful when you see it. And all the gifts you naturally have just accelerate, in ways that are amazing. All right, now I want to talk about your new book.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. Double Blessing, how to receive it, how to give it. Give me the elevator story on the book.
Yeah. Well, before original sin, there was original blessing. And if we get that sequence wrong, we're in trouble. Listen, blessing is God's most ancient instinct. And it is our first memory. And so I think that's hugely significant. And it's not just a subplot, it really is the storyline all the way from Genesis to Revelation. And you've got the priests pronouncing a blessing on the people. You've got, from the top of Mount Gerizim, wonderful blessings being pronounced. You've got Jacob blessing his sons. And then you get all the way to even the Last Supper and this practice that we call the Lord's table or communion. That cup is called the cup of blessing. And so this idea of blessing is from beginning to end, and yet I think a lot of us have a hard time believing it. It's easier for us to buy into original sin than original blessing. And when we doubt God's goodness, or when we doubt God's blessing, what happens is we begin to relate to him for the wrong reasons, out of fear instead of love. And it really skews that relationship. And actually one of the chapters in the book is God in the Hands of Angry People, which is sort of a playful poke at Jonathan Edwards.
Yes.
What happens is we, in the beginning, God created us in his image. We create God in our image, ever since, so to speak. And when we do that, we end up with a God who acts and thinks and looks and talks a lot like us. And it ends up being a projection of our imperfections instead of really a true picture of a God who is unbelievably good and unbelievably great. So in a snapshot, how do we position ourselves for that blessing? In other words, how do we get it? But then how do we flip the blessing, and how do we give it away?
Oh, I love that. So, okay, remembering that some of my audience don't self-identify as people of faith, what universal spiritual truth might they get from reading your book that they could apply to their lives?
Yeah, pretty simple. I would say the first half of the book is all about gratitude, and it's appreciating what you have. And it, really regardless of faith matrix, so to speak, I tell you what, you got to count your blessings. Now, in Judaism, they would pronounce 100 blessings a day. That was kind of their quota. But one way or the other, either you're frustrated by what you don't have because you're focused on that, or you really learn to appreciate the little blessings. Listen, we'll take 23,000 breaths today, and to me, that's 23,000 miracles, I mean, unbelievable. Our heart will beat 100,000 times. 5 quarts of blood will travel through 60,000 miles of arteries and veins and capillaries. That'll circle the earth twice. I mean, those are amazing things. Einstein said there are only 2 ways to live your life. One is as if nothing is a miracle. The other is as if everything is. And so, Ian, the first half of the book is really about growing in gratitude, and then the second half is about generosity, and I'm sure we can talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, these are themes that I think transcend. Certainly, their presence in the Christian tradition is of vital importance. But again, I think if you don't identify as a Christian or even a person of any faith, these are universal spiritual principles that you ought to know, and regardless of what the source is, you ought to go and read about them. So I'm just going to commend this book to everybody, regardless of whether they're a person of faith or not. You don't have to buy the whole package, but you go and search a truth wherever it can be found. In my mind, I think it's fantastic. Hey everybody, I want to tell you about my friend Michael Cusick and Restoring the Soul. One of the lessons I've learned, Anthony,
tell me,
is that not everybody benefits from a traditional 50-minute hour, or even from the typical weekly sessions. And this is why some people, even though they may have a great therapist, can go to couples therapy or personal counseling for months or even years. Some folks, they never really get anywhere if they're just going on a weekly basis. They don't make any progress.
That's right.
So this is why I'm such a fan and a believer in the intense counseling process at Restoring the Soul in Colorado. Restoring the Soul was created by my longtime friend Michael Cusick, who helps couples and individuals experience deep change in half-day blocks over 1 or 2 weeks. Michael and his team know that sometimes you can't wait months or years, Anthony.
That's right.
To get to the bottom of an issue or experience breakthrough. So I want you to get a hold of Michael and his team. If you really feel like you're in a rut and you can't wait months or years, you can call Restoring the Soul for a free consultation. That's 303-932-9777 and learn how their intensive counseling process can jumpstart your journey or launch you to a whole new place in life. Make sure to visit www.restoringthesoul.com/typology to download their PDF called, Anthony.
Hey, 5 ways unaddressed trauma may be derailing your relationships.
And now, back to our guest. You know what's interesting to me, Mark? Who lots of Enneagram teachers will point to as the quintessential 3?
No.
Is Jacob.
Oh, no kidding. Of course. Of course.
Wow.
Yes.
So it's so funny to me that a lot of your book, you've got Jacob floating around in there.
Mark, I'm curious to know why you say of course.
Yeah, why are you saying of course?
Well, because the the shadow side, that cardinal sin, so to speak, is the deceit or the deceiver, so to speak. I mean, that was Jacob's name, and but for all of Jacob's faults, here's a guy who was willing to wrestle all night and would not let go, except he be blessed. And so for all of his faults and foibles, he accurately estimated the value of the blessing. And so I love that piece. And of course, the blessing was God literally changing his name to Israel, and the man becomes the nation. And what a legacy, because all because of that one wrestling match.
Right?
Yeah.
Man, and each type is called into that match to really go into the shadow, where all of that material we don't want to know about ourselves needs to be worked through. I love what Carl Jung says. It's one of my favorite quotes, where he said, "That which you most need to know about yourself will be found in the place you least want to look."
Yeah. Wow.
And isn't that the wrestling?
Yes.
So powerful. So powerful. Mark, what were you going to say? I just saw you jump in. What were you going to say?
Well, it's interesting. Right before that encounter, he sends his family across the Jabbok River along with all of his possessions. So there's this moment of nakedness where it's just Jacob by himself in the middle of nowhere, and it's just kind of him and God. And I think we need moments like that where everything is stripped away. And, there might be some people listening, Ian, that, they feel like something's being taken away from them, a relationship or even a career, and those can be painful. And I don't want to, I don't know the specifics, but I've worked with enough people to know that sometimes it's some of those things that are precious to us being taken away that we really discover who we are in those moments. And so maybe that's a word of encouragement, someone listening today.
Well, I mean, it is. And I think one of the beautiful things, I think, for threes and for every type, of course, but for the sake of just, hanging in there a little bit with threes, is like, in my experience, it takes a crash usually when a three feels like all of the accoutrements of success have been stripped away, and all they have, as you were saying, is the core of being. That's all it is. It's just me as a being, not as a doing, in the presence of God, wrestling to perhaps discover that my goodness, and I do believe in, as you were talking about, there's original goodness in every human being, right? Otherwise, how would we even begin to recognize who God was? I mean, we would have no glimmer. And so I think that is a profound sort of insight. And I just love that a 3 on the Enneagram wrote a book where Jacob features pretty prominently, right? and I mean, that's no mistake. I don't think that's a mistake. So people, listen to me. You got to get your hands on Double Blessing, how to receive it, how to give it. I know it's going to be on Amazon or wherever you find great books. You can go to markbatterson.com and check out everything that Mark's doing. When you're in Washington, D.C., you got to go to National, right?
Yep.
National Community Church. You got 7 choices, right?
Yes. Yep.
7 campuses. That's pretty amazing. You doer.
Yeah.
and I'll tell you, man, I have loved this conversation. It's been like sometimes I have conversations with people and I just feel the joy juice running, and I have really, really felt that in this time. Yeah. So thank you.
Well, and Ian, I just have to say, kind of on a closing note, I feel like my street cred just went up because my wife and I, we listen to a lot of podcasts, but this one's pretty special. She loves the Enneagram and is intuitively brilliant when it comes to helping other people in this regard. And so I'll do a handful of podcasts or radio interviews, that kind of thing. And I don't know that she really cares about any of those, but when she heard that you and I were going to have a conversation, my street cred went up big time. So fun stuff.
Give her my very best and tell her I'd love actually to get the two of you on at some point just to talk about the dynamic of 3 and 1 in marriage. And just even I'd love to. I don't get a lot of 1s. A lot of times 1s are hard to 5s, and 1s are sometimes hard to get on. I think 1s feel like I'm not going to be good enough. How much can I prepare? It's kind of a funny thing, but it'd be really fun to get the two of you on. So I hope we can do that in the near future.
Yeah.
I love it. That would be a ton of fun.
All right, everybody. Please remember, go out there. You want to get Mark Batterson's new book, Double Blessing: How to Receive It, How to Give It. And remember the great words of the great Oscar Wilde: be yourself. Everybody else is already taken.